Good morning. It is Super Sunday, February 13th, and I mean Super Sunday because we have a super speaker. Please remember, keep yourself muted. If you have a question, you can put it in the chat. And with no further ado, I really kind of want to say this man needs no introduction, but we haven't, of course, we would be remiss if we did not. So I introduce Wendy Rhodes, who will give us an introduction.
Thanks, Vanessa. I am thrilled and honored to introduce my friend, mentor, and sacred partner, Rabbi Rick Jacobs, this morning for his preview of where he sees Reform Judaism going from here. While you may know that Rick has been the president of the URJ for 10 years and is an agent of change, you may not know that one of his original passions was for modern dance. So if we have enough time before Q's and A's, Rick, perhaps you could do a few interpretive sequences for us. With that, I'd like to turn it over to Rick.
Thank you. Let's just hold off the possibility about some interpretive dance. Let's just dive into all the things. But thank you, Wendy, for that wonderful introduction. And listen, when Wendy asked, would I do this? You know, the answer is, of course. This is pure joy for me. And to see Holly in her role there, I vividly remember being with you. It feels like it was a very long time ago, though chronologically it was not. I did have a question about meeting on Super Sunday. I said, you know, I guess it has to do with the teams in the Super Bowl, that it's not an all-day yontif in Chicago, which, okay, that's fine too. But to me, anyway, the game is later. This is a chance to have a conversation about some really important trends that you're actually not only seeing, but I'm going to make the case that you're actually at the vanguard of many of those changes that are happening within our larger reform movement and the larger Jewish community. So I'm going to share some images, but do keep the chat open, and you can pose questions as we go. If some of them are, you know, kind of clarifying questions, like Rabbi Jacobs, I didn't catch that that point that you just made. Could you just repeat it? Put that in the chat. I'll try to keep an eye on it. And Vanessa and Wendy, if you see something that's just, you know, unmute and call it out so I can stay focused. And then we'll have a chance to discuss all of it, because again, this isn't simply my telling all of you, it's my sharing my sense, my insights, my questions, and then having the chance to hear from you is like, that's exactly what the world is supposed to be about. I see in trying to share, it's telling me I can't yet. I wonder if, do I need to make a contribution to the synagogue? What do I have to do?
Oh, wait, let's make sure. You're a co-host. You should be able to
got it. I changed it. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay. So
now
let's try one more time. It still is not. I don't know what that is. So you know what? Maybe I'll just send you.
Yeah, send it to me.
There we go. And then give me 1 second. And
people are still coming in, so.
Okay, so I'll start talking because obviously this is coming from the core of who I am and what I've been doing with so many leaders across the North American and the broader global spectrum. I wanted to share some of what we know demographically, some of what we know anecdotally, and a lot of what we know about how to shape the future. I don't think the future happens in some, inner sanctum. We shape that future. That's actually how Reform Judaism got to be as strong as it currently is. And what it means is that we have the chance to, kind of really pay attention to some of those shifts that, others didn't either predict or notice. In the post-World War II era, Reform Judaism was actually a sliver of what we are today. And again, conservative Judaism was this very large entity, had people many from Eastern European ancestry. And then over the course of the last part of the 20th century, Reform Judaism grew. And it grew in a number of very significant and I think clear ways. In the chat, can anybody just put down a one sentence thought as to what accounted for our dramatic growth in the post-World War II era that has not only shifted us to become a bit larger, but currently we're larger than the Orthodox, conservative, and Reconstructing Judaism movements combined. So that's a dramatic shift in the numbers, and that's how people identify. Any theories? Come on, I assume this is a group that meets regularly to talk about things. So Sharon Stein says, because of our social justice, I think that is clearly a key reason. Community, bigger parking lots, right? Especially in the suburbs. There was a real move to the suburbs after World War II. That was a piece of the puzzle. Surely a desire to blend in and not stand out. Again, reform allowing you to kind of be in both worlds in a key way. I also think one thing that hasn't been noted yet, which I'm just gonna lay out there, the response to intermarriage. Response to intermarriage by our movement, particularly by Rabbi Alexander Schindler, is absolutely transformational, because Rabbi Schindler, instead of telling interfaith families to stay away, Rabbi Schindler said, no, come close. The demographics, if you look at the more recent two Pew surveys from 2013 and from last year, the majority of weddings that take place in the Jewish community are interfaith weddings. So if interfaith families are not welcomed into your communities, you're going to miss more than half of the Jewish community as it grows. So this has been a strategic and I think really powerful expression of who we are. And Rabbi Schindler, who took a lot of heat in the late 70s when he led that shift, it turns out to have been prophetic and absolutely transformational. Yes, thank you, Alice, from the interfaith work there as well. So all these factors combined help to explain our strength. But what I want to make sure to say is that none of those things necessarily will count automatically in the future. What are the things that are happening today that we have to pay attention to, understand, and adapt to? These are things that, again, you don't once and for all recapture a larger slice of the Jewish community. And I think that we see some of these changes as helpful. Can I just ask, I sent Vanessa and Wendy the PowerPoint. I don't know if it's there.
I didn't get it yet. I think Wendy did, but
let's
hang on, I got it. I just
have to. Yes. Thank you, Holly.
Terrific. So let's take all these themes and questions and see if we can't kind of take the experience of your congregation, which I'll point out in a minute, is exemplifying some of the really exciting adaptive responses to the world that we're in, and to see how it is that you're witnessing your community's changes may be a bit of a window into the larger changes that are going on across North America. We'll have a chance also to reflect a little bit about what's happening in Israel, because I think it's actually connected to some of these very same changes that we see here. So
it's not letting me sign into Outlook with it. Hold on.
Okay. Okay.
Give me one more minute. I'm going to try one more thing.
Right, the same with me. I got it, but Wendy, could you open it?
She's muted.
Working on it. Okay.
Vanessa's parents.
They're always on.
On sideways.
Always.
Always.
Okay.
Okay, well, we're about to do the great rabbinic dance called the pivot. And the pivot is always the key in Jewish life, because there's always what you planned, and then there's what happens, and you got to just flow with it. So I'm just going to barrel ahead because we have limited time and I don't want to lose that time. So if I could, one of the things I want to point out is that what we see in terms of adaptive leadership is that it's theological as well as some, trick of some contemporary consultant. So my teacher, Rabbi David Hartman, who founded the Hartman Institute in Jerusalem and was one of the lights of modern Orthodoxy. I studied with him for several years in Jerusalem. And Rabbi Hartman says the following. He says, if your tradition is based on learning, interpretation, and disagreements among scholars rather than the absolute word of prophetic revelation, you cannot escape the haunting uncertainty of knowing that alternative ways are religiously viable and authentic. What he's saying is that built into the Jewish tradition is the notion that we must adapt and change and grow and experiment, and that's not a feature only of liberal Judaism. He made the case throughout his life, though somewhat unsuccessfully with the wider Orthodox community, that change was necessary and holy. I wanted to also just remind us that not making change is one of the most deadly things. Put your hand up in the air if you ever had something called a Palm Pilot or a BlackBerry phone. Put your hand up if I see, okay, I see a couple of hands. Put your hand up if you ever had a Kodak camera that took pictures with film, okay? Put your hands up. Put your hand up if you've ever gone to a store called Blockbuster and rented a video, okay? So I tell you those particular examples because they're all examples of companies that didn't adapt to the world that we're in. Kodak literally missed the entire digital revolution. They were hunkering down on the status quo, and they have now, beyond a sliver, right? Blockbuster, they couldn't see Netflix coming. How about Palm Pilot? I thought it was the greatest thing since sliced bagels when I was a fairly young rabbi. But these are all examples of what didn't change. Now, our founder, put in the chat if someone knows the name of the rabbi who founded the URJ, known as the UAC, the Hebrew Union College, the Central Conference of American Rabbis. One remarkable leader founded each of those three pillar institutions of our reform movement. Put in the chat. I'll give Rabbi Sirota extra credit here because I know this is a very learned group. Do you need me to give you a multiple choice? Okay, multiple choices. That was Michael Jordan. That's choice A. It was maybe Franklin Delano Roosevelt or Isaac Merowise. There I see it from Sandra and Ross. Thank you, Ross. That was going to be a follow-up email. Thank you for getting that. He came to this country. He started out in Orthodox synagogue and he made some initial changes, but the Orthodox congregation was having none of it. He wanted to offer prayers in the vernacular, offer a sermon in the vernacular. He also thought that families should sit together. What a radical idea. And they ran him out. It turns out it allowed him to found not only a congregation, but a movement. And we are still the people who are following up on that. I think what your congregation is doing right now is an example of what it means to adapt, to pivot, and transform. So with the permission of your clergy, and I had a beautiful picture of Evan, Ike, and Jay, this triumvirate. This is how you actually don't become Kodak or Palm Pilot or BlackBerry, because you look at what's happening around and you say, okay, how can we adapt and be strong in this, right? That is the key. So just a couple of little details that are important. I'll give you a couple of statistics from the Pew Report, which again, for a lot of Jews, the Pew Report is more sacred than the Torah, right? If it says it in the Pew Report, it's got to be true. But it turns out, I wouldn't say it's instead of the Torah, but it has some really important things to point out. One is that reform continued to grow between 2013 and 2020. 37% of the folks who identified with one of the movements identified with us. The conservative movement went down to 17%, and orthodoxy dropped a tiny bit as well. The key thing, however, is it's not all, look how strong we are, look how big we are. The trend line is concerning. So here's a statistic that you just have to try and absorb. Among American Jews who are not synagogue members, 36% identify with Reform, which means that you can be someone who would tell people, I'm a Reformed Jew, but not belong to a synagogue. That's much less common in Orthodoxy, much less common in conservative Judaism. That means we've got a bunch of people who think they're part of us, but aren't officially. So I take that as an opportunity, right? That means they already feel connected to who we are, what we do, but we have to build those bridges. I was just, before the call started, hearing an update from Holly about the demographics of your welcoming new members. And what are some of the ways that you've rethought how we even define membership? What's the financial relationship? All those things are ways to build a bridge from outside to inside. That's really smart. Here's the biggest trend line. And when Tanny Perel is with you, first of all, she's a member of our North American board. She's fantastic. She would maybe point out to you that the demographics are that among 65-year-olds and older, 44% identify with Reform. Go younger by 15 years, 35%. Go younger to 30 to 49-year-olds, 37%. You go to the 18 to 29-year-olds, it's 29%. What that means is as we demographically identify the younger cohorts, fewer are identifying with Reform Judaism. That's much the case with conservative. It's not the case in Orthodoxy. The younger ones, because they're growing from their internal growth, right? The size of families, the number of children, they're growing. So if we don't make adaptive changes to this important trend line, we will not be strong. We will not be large. I'm confident we will make those adaptations, but to be truthful, this is one of the tests for us. The other huge demographic is that diversity, the number of Jews of color, the Jews who are multiracial, for 65 and older is a sliver. 3% identify as Jews of color. When you get to the 18 to 29-year-olds, it's 15%. When you include Mizrahi, Jews from North Africa and from the greater Middle East, it's almost a third. So as we become young, if we look at the younger cohorts, if we don't make our communities welcoming of multiracial as well as interfaith, the demographic trend line is really very concerning. So I point all this out to you that we got to look and be honest at what we see. This is not about hoping for a better future. It's about being strategic and smart and making those shifts. One of the things I think what we're doing now is we're having a class on Zoom. What a fabulous thing. I mean, I'd love getting on a flight and getting to Chicago, having the balmy, Chicago air in the middle of winter. I mean, what is more, kind of wonderful than that blast of that wind in Chicago? But I desperately would love to be with you in person, but I love that we're able to do this in a virtual format. We're actually calling that multi-access and not hybrid. Hybrid means technology. Multi-access means how do we get more people to connect? Interestingly, more Jews connected to Friday night services during the pandemic than before. That's reported from almost 300 of our congregations. What that means is people were hungry and they were feeling nourished by what you do and what other congregations do. That was an opportunity to broaden our tent. And I think we see that that's actually happened in significant ways. Some of the big shifts and changes, we're celebrating this year the 50th anniversary of one particular Reform rabbi who was ordained in 1972. Anybody know the name of that rabbi who changed forever the face of the rabbinate and changed the face of American Jewish life? Her name is Rabbi Sally, someone's going to get it in there, Rabbi Sally Priesand. And this year we celebrate the 50th anniversary of her ordination, and it opened the floodgates to bring women into all of the rightful places in leadership. The number of women who are presidents of congregations, women who are educators, executive directors. This is a significant example of where some of these changes are. One of the things that we're doing is helping congregations lead change. So we actually have groups of congregations working on new models of membership, new ways to organize learning, how to make sure to keep people engaged after their children are, if they have children, after they're grown and out of the house. So again, how do we collectively at this movement use the intuition and the experiences to grow all of it? So here are just a couple of things we learned about a month ago when we did a survey of congregations in the Reform movement, including your congregation. Turns out that in 2019 to 2020, which is the first year of the pandemic, 69% of congregations reported a decrease in membership. Fast forward last year, between 20 and 2021, 40% described increase, right? The number of households. What I'm learning about your congregation is you're even in a higher category, because you grew by 80 households last year. I think if we did it in terms of percentages, I think you may be the lead congregation in doing that. That's 86. Thank you, Holly, for making even a better number, 86. That's an example of thinking about the ways that we don't simply survive, but we thrive. We find ways to adapt, and those adaptation basically make us more powerful and more successful. I also would just say we've learned a lot of things. I want to just say a couple of words about social justice. During the first year of the pandemic was a pretty dramatic year for social justice and racial justice here in America in particular. And the Black Lives Matter movement took front and center stage for a lot of us. And it felt as an urgent moral question for our movement. But we didn't make up social justice. I know sometimes our Orthodox colleagues say, you basically made social justice into a religious part of our lives. But excuse me, the prophet Isaiah, the book of Leviticus, open a page of any sacred text and tell me that it doesn't speak about our obligation to do social justice. Isaiah in chapter 1 says, seek justice, undo oppression, defend the fatherless, plead for the widow. It's core to who we are. Pew asked Jews to say, what's the most important piece of being Jewish? And the largest category is not observing holidays. It's not prayer. It's standing for equality and social justice. Overwhelmingly, that's the way that most Jews will define their core ethical obligations. So this is not a little thing, and it's not a new thing, but for us, it's an essential thing that we as a movement have been growing. Now, we have reform, we have what's called RAC Illinois, which means that we have a RAC, a Religious Action Center in Washington, D.C., and we have a Religious Action Center in the state of Illinois. Put your hand up if you've been a part of any of the gatherings of RAC Illinois. I'm confident that your congregation has been a pillar of this work, and it's a core part of being Jewish. So not just on a national level, but how do we stand up for what's just and right in Chicago and other parts of Illinois? This has been a way to broaden our impact in social justice. So kol hakavod to you. I saw on your website, Macomb, Solel, Lakeside, and there's a beautiful picture of a group of people holding a sign that says Jews for Refugees. That's you. That's one of your banners. When someone comes to learn about your congregation, we see, oh, Macomb, Solel, Lakeside stands up for justice. I believe, as someone put it in the chat, that is a magnet. People do not want to be part of religious communities that don't have a voice about justice, that don't stand up for what's right. And one of the ways we do that is internally with racial equity, diversity, and inclusion. We can't be marching for social justice or religious, pluralism or racial justice out there if inside Jews of color tell us they don't feel so welcome. And people say things that make them feel like outsiders. So we brought Yolanda Savage Narva to lead our work. And she's also helping a lot of congregations, maybe yours as well, do the work internally to make sure we are anti-racist, that we don't have attitudes or practices that just grate the wrong way. Because if you're trying to grow, think about how you're going to grow. And I thank you, Wendy. Yolanda is going to be with you for Shabbat this coming week. So there it is. I'll be an advertisement. She is brilliant. She's a remarkable teacher for all of us. And she's also sometimes telling us some hard things that we need to know. But the reason we grew after World War II, and we're continuing, is that this big tent has to be more and more inclusive. Who are the people who might not feel included in our tent of Reform Judaism? I want to see in the chat, who are people who, besides Jews of color, because again, I just named them, who are other groups of people who may not feel that they could walk into our congregations? People who are not both born as Jewish. Thank you, Ross, 100%. People sometimes just ask very innocent questions, but it makes that couple or that family feel less than authentic walking in. How about, thank you, non-Jewish spouses, LGBTQ, thank you, plus, for sure. Young people with differing views on Israel, thank you for that. Single parents, right? Widows and widowers, for sure. Can I also name, what about liberal and conservatives? What about the person who feels that their political views will be anathema in a community? They may hesitate to walk in, or if they do walk in, to open their mouths. So how do we stand for something, but also make room for people who have diversity of practices? It used to be, do you remember a time where Reform, if you wore a yarmulke, people were like, oh, you must not be Reform. I saw Rabbi Sirota wearing his beautiful Bukharian kippah. Well, if you walked into a congregation, Reform congregation, in the late 19th century wearing a kippah, they would just say, you got the wrong place. And that was true when I grew up in Reform Judaism in many congregations. Today, people make their choices, and I'm sure that's true for your congregation. So how do we become open and welcoming for the lifelong Reform Jews, the brand new Reform Jews, and those who have yet to find their place? I also want to I have to say a few words about anti-Semitism. I didn't think that talking to you in the beginning of 2022, that anti-Semitism would be as large a phenomenon as it is. But obviously you're well aware, we're all aware, and it's been a particularly challenging time. We have, for the past 7 months, had a robust and growing partnership with the ADL, the Anti-Defamation League, offering their resources to help congregations develop the ability to respond, to have training, and to be ready to face anti-Semitism wherever it is in our communities. And can I just say, if I use the example of Congregation Beth Israel in Colleyville, Texas, as an example, I know you were all, like we all were fixated on that unbelievably worrisome hostage taking a few Shabbatot ago. One of the things that Congregation Beth Israel and their remarkable rabbi, Charlie Citron Walker, say is they used our resource, the URJ and ADL and the Secure Communities Network training that helped keep Colleyville's Reformed congregations safe. Rabbi went through active shooter training. Besides learning Talmud and Tanakh and holidays and history, one of the things that we religious leaders and all of us need to do, we need to know how to prevent anti-Semitic attacks. One of the things we also know about Colleyville is that what was the most inspiring thing that happened during that horrific day of waiting and hoping is that the faith leaders of every faith community in Colleyville showed up and were with Rabbi Citron Walker's family. The lead imam of the era, Imam Omar Suleiman, the Chabad rabbi, the evangelical pastor, they all had built beautiful relationships with the congregation and with Rabbi Citron Walker. So it was an example where solidarity wasn't an expression of weakness, but solidarity made us stronger there and elsewhere. Yes, thank you for the note that Rabbi Moffick was classmates with Rabbi Citron Walker. So the experience in Colleyville is not isolated. The ADL, marks an uptick across all lines, and it's not only the Jewish community, but all indicators of hate. But among religious communities, the most hate incidents were against the Jewish community. Many of those against Orthodox Jews who wear their Jewishness everywhere they go. But it was true, obviously, in other congregations. We know Tree of Life in Chicago. One of the things that I just want to give you one Super Bowl teaching about anti-Semitism. Would that be okay? Whether you care about who wins tonight or not, you are aware we're Americans. There's a football game tonight, right? There was a Jewish player for the Patriots, the New England Patriots, named Julian Edelman. I believe he was even MVP of one of the Super Bowls, and a proud Jewish man. Well, there was a Miami Heat basketball player a few months back who had said some really outrageous things about Jews. So Julian Edelman didn't call him out. He called him in. He reached out to him and publicly said, I'm going to just quote what he said. He said, "I get the sense that you didn't use that word out of hate, but more out of ignorance." And then Edelman said, "Most likely you weren't trying to hurt anyone or even profile Jews in your comment." And then he said, "I'm down in Miami pretty often. How about we do a Shabbat dinner? How about we have a chance to talk?" That, my friends, is one thing we do, and I'm sure you do it in your congregation, which is build those interfaith bridges. And I'm not suggesting that we go find the neo-Nazi and say, "Hey, would you like to have Shabbat dinner?" But the person who says an offensive comment, many of them can actually be engaged. And I think that Julian Edelman gives us an example of a football player who is able to model some of that best practice. We're seeing growth in the number of young people in our camps. We sent more kids to Israel last year in the Reform Movement, URJ, than in the past 10 years. We have an additional scholarship to make those trips more affordable and to make them more impactful when those teens return. I just would say that for me, Jewish life came alive when I was at our summer camp, our Reform summer camp in Northern California. For a lot of our rabbis, for a lot of our lay leaders, camp and Israel and youth experiences have shaped who we are in very powerful ways. I want to just say a sentence about our Reform movement in Israel, and then I'll conclude and we'll have a chance to spend the rest of our time in dialogue. We take our Jewish values everywhere. When people say, why does the Reform movement speak up when racist members of the Knesset spew out hate against Arabs? Why does the Reform movement raise our voice? Because we raise our voice here when people spew out hate, and we do so to have moral accountability. Our Reform Israel Religious Action Center took on those hate comments by members of the Otzma Yehudit party, and now they're part of the Religious Zionist party. And we actually prevented some of them from being seated in the Knesset because of their offensive moral statements. So we do this work, and we're growing in Israel. We stand for something. We stand for pluralism, inclusion, creativity, openness, all those things. And it's exciting to watch that growth. We're also, I'm going to be, this morning's Jerusalem Post heralded that I'm going to be in Israel in 2 weeks, and I'm meeting with the Prime Minister, and that's true. And one of the things that we're going to talk about is why there's not more progress on the Western Wall, that the wall should be a place for all of us to pray as we pray. We're the majority of Jews in the world, and currently, unless you're Orthodox, in the open spaces, your prayer is not permitted. We do have a little space that's a third-rate space currently. The promise was to make it a first-rate place, but we want to make Israel a place where all Jews can practice Judaism openly and wholeheartedly. Rabbi Sirota, Rabbi Moffick, Cantor O'Brien, or I want to go do a wedding in Israel. impossible. Israeli Reform rabbis can't officially do weddings. We want to change that because it'll make Israel better. It'll make Jewish life more robust. So my last point is about the pipeline, not the one from Russia to Germany, the pipeline into Jewish life. That pipeline needs to be strengthened. And when I ask Jews in our movement, where did you come from, or people who are part of our movement, more report they're not reporting they grew up in the Reform movement. That means that our pipeline can be strengthened by having people come from more traditional backgrounds, from no background, from other faith communities. So we need to figure out how to increase that flow in to Jewish life, because it won't weaken us, it will strengthen us. I deeply believe that. And that we have a sacred mission. Our mission is to be God's partners in creating a more just and compassionate and equitable world, and to increase the amount of joy and meaning all of us have in our individual lives, in our families, and in our communities. That's our work, and we can do that. My last thought is from a building that some of you maybe visited once upon a time in New York City. On Fifth Avenue, there's a large Reform synagogue called Temple Emmanuel. My guess is a few of you have heard of it, maybe a few of you have visited. Across the street, one block lower from 65th, was the headquarters of the Reform movement called the UAHC. It was 838 Fifth Avenue. On the side of the building is a quote from Micah. It's literally etched in stone. You know how we say to people, well, here's my thought, but it's not etched in stone. This is etched in stone. It says, love mercy, do justly, and walk humbly with your God. The key for us is as we change, we hold our core values even more tightly. How we live those values, how we adapt to models of membership, ways to engage young people, ways to more effectively organize statewide and North American-wide campaigns to change the world into the world that ought to be. Those do not have to be things that weaken us. They actually can strengthen us. And so my last teaching is from Rabbi Lord Jonathan Sacks of blessed memory, who once upon a time was the chief rabbi of the United Kingdom. He said, change is not threatening so long as we keep firm hold of the values by and for which we live. We're going to change Reform movement. That is for sure. Look at your congregation. You're leading the idea of how we can bring together different communities so that we can be stronger. That doesn't weaken you, that strengthens you. Those are shifts and changes we're seeing across the movement, shifts and changes that frankly signify what we are at our heart, which is the movement that's not afraid to make change. When people say, why doesn't everybody welcome interfaith families? Well, when Rabbi Schindler said we're going to do it, he got such pushback. What happened when HUC ordained the first woman rabbi? Was that celebrated by everybody? Not a chance. What happened when Reform rabbis went into Mississippi to register voters and to overcome all of the voting rights barriers that are unfortunately being brought back today? Were they celebrated by their congregations? No. My teacher, Rabbi Jack Stern, was down at Freedom Summer. He was down in Georgia and Mississippi. And when he came back, people were not universally happy. When he retired, everybody was happy. So how do we find the courage to make changes that are needed? And for some of you, I'm looking at the screen, some of us have been at it a long while. We like our movement the way it is. So how do we embrace change and not feel like we are losing something, but we aren't gaining something? So with that, I'm going to just do what even Reform rabbis, we know how to do. I'm going to take a breath. I'm going to just look at the chat to see if we have, but I'm going to count on Ross and Wendy and Vanessa and Holly, maybe also to keep your eyes. We certainly can have people raise their hands and ask questions out loud. And we can also encourage people to put their question in the chat, and then we can call on you. But let's spend the last 20 minutes. Let's have a conversation. What did you hear? What didn't you hear? What are you concerned about? What are you excited about? let's just have, because I'm hoping to learn something from all of you and gain something new from this conversation. So with that, I will pause and leave it to my wonderful colleagues to get us started.
So Yasher Koach, you didn't have your PowerPoint, and thank you for pivoting on that. The first comment that someone would like to hear is from Rich and Andy Amen. Please comment on the place of caring for the earth in this time of climate crisis, the dire reality of what we are bequeathing to any future generation. It's not a leading question. But...
Oh, no, it's a fabulous question. So God bless you for asking, because I didn't have time, obviously, to go through all. I would make the case that it's the most urgent question before not just the religious community, but all humankind. And I also would say, if we think that we're going to appeal to the next generation to be part of Jewish life, you can simply forget that if we don't have a robust commitment to caring for the earth with more social responsibility. Can I just share that one of the last things I did as a congregational rabbi, which I love, by the way, being a congregational rabbi in Westchester, New York, we built a LEED certified synagogue campus, which meant that everything about the building was respectful of the environment. All the systems in the synagogue are respectful. And it's also a zero, now after I left, it's now a zero waste synagogue where they don't, have those bags of plastic utensils that get thrown away after every event. So that's just an indication of a small way congregations can do this, but as a movement, we are part of the larger religious communities standing strong that we need to make these changes. The Glasgow conference, it just happened a few weeks ago. That was not something that we as a religious community want to watch. We want to take the lead and say, our faith requires us to act in this way. So thank you for the question. It's urgent and it's on all of us.
We thank the Amens. They are very active on our Green Committee. We have a lot of fabulous projects going on at Macomb Solel Lakeside, and they're always at the forefront. I promise, Andy, we have less plastic and we try to have zero waste. Wendy, did you have your hand up? Wait a minute. There you go. Wait. Go one more time. Go ahead.
I did, but I wanted to point toward Rich and Andy's question, which he just
which I did. Okay. All right.
So first of all, can I just say we've got so many leaders on this call, and I look at Janet Buckstein, who's service on the North American board. As I look around, this is an amazing group that you have in your congregation. You got a lot of leaders locally, but you got leaders for the wider movement. So how blessed are we that so much of what you do is affecting all of us. I saw that there was a comment about Miles Leonard coming back to the Champaign-Urbana community and spoke at Chabad. What an amazing thing that he could actually have been brought around and now be someone who can raise his voice out of newfound clarity and understanding. So I think that's an example of people that we maybe walk away from, but there are people that actually can be won over. And as we see the amount of anti-Semitism, but also the amount of hate towards African Americans, hate towards Muslims, we also have to be better at showing up for other people, because we can't expect everybody to call out anti-Semitism and then the mosque is attacked and the Jewish community is busy. We're having mitzvah day. Sorry, we can't come to the mosque. You were threatened violently, but we have mitzvah day. You say, oh, wait a minute, mitzvah day. Let's make mitzvah day where we go over and help to stand publicly in favor of our siblings in faith. So again, this is an active part of what we all need to do.
Next, we have the Simon Broutman family. I'm not sure who wants to speak.
Hi. What does the pipeline of young rabbis look like coming out of seminary?
That is like a prophetic, that is like the question to ask, particularly today. We had a HUC JR board meeting last Sunday, Monday. And the most urgent question before HUC is that we're seeing a reduction in the pipeline into the rabbinate, into the cantorate, into the field of Jewish education, into all youth professionals, all of these. And the thing that I said, again, there's a really robust conversation about this. The current class that's incoming for this coming year at HUC will be one of the smaller classes that we've seen. And it's not the kind of thing that we can only solve by saying, how do we increase the pipeline into the reform and other forms of non-Orthodox leadership? It's got to be a funnel. We need more people coming into synagogue life, more young people coming into camp and youth programs and Israel experiences, college campus. So we need the funnel, which again, not everybody who comes into Jewish life becomes a rabbi, a cantor, an educator, or an executive director, or an early childhood educator. Holly, don't ever let me forget to underscore the importance of our early childhood educators. But the truth is, we're seeing this reduction in the pipeline is across the board in every area. And I think we see that sometimes even in lay leadership, in looking for people who will take those positions of officers and board members. So this is something that won't be solved by HUC. It can only be solved by all of us together. And what we know about Jewish life is we always need leaders. The way we organize in synagogues can change, but we need people who are going to be educated and trained to lead us. And honestly, also to see the empowerment of all of you playing larger and larger roles in Jewish life. But we don't have an example of a Jewish community that's thrived in history without really excellent leadership, which is really, really key. Can I just say, I just saw the latest question.
You have a couple questions there. One about intermarriage, one about blending of the denominations, and the anti-Semitism of Karen. He talked about it a little bit. So let's go.
Sorry about that.
That's okay. That's okay.
So let me take them all sequentially.
Right.
So Susan's question is, can you address the question regarding intermarriage, that eventually Judaism is lost to the family when it reaches the third generation? So here's what I want to say. I don't accept that that's a foregone conclusion.
Agreed.
What we know is when interfaith families raise their families in communities like yours, their kids go to our educational programs, they're part of camp, that demographic is flipped. Okay, so it's a little data point in the Pew survey, but you got to break it down. You got to go inside of it. What we see is that when communities include those interfaith families and they're fully participating and they see Jewish life as a robust part and they feel loved, we see a different experience. So I just would tell you, it's on us to have a different experience. By the way, there are plenty of Jewish families that aren't having much of a experience. So let's take that not as a foregone conclusion. Let's take that as a challenge. I think we can do a whole lot better. And we see evidence that when we do better, it changes everything. That's happened in a number of our communities. The question is, can you visualize blending of denominations within Judaism? Let me just say that we see it today in the following way. First of all, we work very closely with the conservative movement. They are facing a lot of the demographic shifts that we see. And one of the things that people make choices today is not on the brand, but on the experience they have in a community. So if you took off the Makom Solel Lakeside website and materials that it's a Reformed congregation.
So I think Kim's dad is logged in.
And people just walked in and experienced your congregation, how would they feel? And would they feel like it's the right place? And I think that there are people who grew up in Reformed congregations who are members of conservative congregations because they just love the feel. It's socially where their friends groups are. I think one of the things that we see is that our denominations are not all the same. It is still the case in the conservative movement that interfaith families have a very limited role, okay? that is itself a very, I would say, limiting stance to be the Jewish community of today. We also see that some of the changes liturgically, some of the changes in how we celebrate and how we teach are different. I'm not going to use better, worse, but different. So I think that we collaborate regularly, including with modern Orthodox and the Reconstructionist movement. But at the moment, I think our institutions have strength. So collaborating is different than blending, right? I think working closely with is different than eliminating all of the differences. Differences can actually have a positive valence and not just signify, challenging areas. I do see that, thank you for the question about the envoy to combat anti-Semitism, Professor Deborah Lipstadt. I got to tell you, I don't care what your political views are. If you decry the rise in anti-Semitism and you oppose the nomination of Deborah Lipstadt to be the envoy to combat anti-Semitism, you've got a profound disconnect in your internal makeup. She is exactly the right person to be leading that. She's had her hearing this week. And if you get a chance to listen to any of her testimony, she was brilliant and specific and able to strategically explain how in that role she could make a difference, not just by giving speeches, but by making sure that our policy and training. Can I just tell you, the FBI lead in Dallas stood up after the Colleyville hostage situation was resolved when they were able to break free. And he said publicly it had nothing to do with anti-Semitism. It was unimaginable. And, I had the chance to speak with Merrick Garland that day, the Attorney General. I spoke to the head of Homeland Security. They were very quick to reach out to us. And I said, we have to do better training. We have to make sure that people who are on the front lines of law enforcement know, that basically promulgating all of these conspiracy theories against Jews is called anti-Semitism. So I think the truth is she needs to be confirmed. We need to have a little bit more, there's a fight to get her even a chance to be heard. I think she will be seated, but the truth is it's taken these very many months, which I think is lost time. And it's indicative of the partisan divide, which I think they couldn't agree on anything. The weather, whether Chicago pizza is better than New York pizza, they couldn't agree on anything. And by the way, I'm not gonna have an opinion about that. Don't even press me on deep dish pizza versus no opinion.
That's a no-win, especially with this group. We have another question from Floyd, another URJ, very active. Given our concern, and Floyd, I'm going to say concern/involvement for social justice, will the role of the RAC grow or be more emphasized in the coming years?
I'll just tell you, the RAC is a large part of who we are. One of the things we do regularly is train thousands of teens to do this work in their communities, in our Litaken fellowships. So, and I think the growth of our statewide initiatives, we're now in 9 states. Besides RAC Illinois, RAC California was our first, RAC New York, RAC Texas, really important in Texas. Can I just underscore that? RAC Massachusetts, and I could just tell you that this is a chance for us to use our strength. We met with Chuck Schumer, who's, as you know, not only the senator from New York, but the majority leader. RAC New York convened a meeting. He wasn't going to take the meeting, and then I'm sure he was going to stay for about 5 minutes. He got on the Zoom. We had 1,000 people on the Zoom, representing over 30 congregations, representing lots of people who voted, lots of people who support. He had to give a speech on the floor of the Senate. He said, "I will be right back. Don't go anywhere." And then he went and gave a speech and came back to finish that. Can I just tell you, we have power. RAC Illinois, you have enormous power. You've been one of our most effective bodies. So we can't just think nationally and North American wide. How do we locally use our strength. And your congregation linked with the other Reformed congregations in the greater Chicago area, this is like a power plant of activism. So this is not going to get smaller, it's going to get bigger. And I think one of the things that we see, and this, I'm sure you've experienced it, it may even be on this Zoom call, some people mistakenly think that our commitment to social justice is partisan. It can't be. Not only it's not, it can't be. And when we have a civic engagement, as we did in the presidential election, we were committed to get more people to vote. How they voted was their business. We are now launching a new civic engagement this spring, which includes our racial justice, our criminal justice reform, all of the key things. This is not partisan, but it gets sometimes sidelined by the tensions in congregations where people say, well, if you're committed to social justice, you probably are progressive. That may be true in many cases. It cannot be true in all cases. And as a movement, we actually cross a dangerous line if it becomes that. So we've got work to do. This is urgent, moral, religious work to do. And when people say, you know, Rabbi, don't talk about all those issues like climate change or criminal justice or voting rights, it's so divisive. Excuse me? It's divisive? No, those issues signal really key commitments. If we back away and all we do is sing, no offense, is Cantor O'Brien on the call? I love singing.
Oh, he's not.
Right. But he would tell us we not only need to sing, but we need to stand up and shout sometimes. We can't just be avoiding the hard issues facing our world. We will be abdicating our 3,000 years of Jewish wisdom and Jewish commitment if we do that. So not only are we growing that part, it must grow because it's an urgent part of religious life. By the way, in Israel, they fight us on that. I debated a candidate to be chief rabbi of Israel in the Knesset. It was a one-on-one. It was like one of these gladiator matches. It was not the most fun I've ever had, but it was a really interesting thing. He accused me of making up Tikkun Olam. He accused me of basically creating this whole area of Jewish law. And I said, first of all, my mom would be very impressed by that I made up Tikkun Olam. But it turns out, I said, you have a Bible? He goes, I have many Bibles. I said, well, if you open randomly to any page, I can assure you it talks about social justice or Tikkun Olam. Open the Talmud, talks about social. So this is fundamental. In Israel, they want it to be about ritual. They want it to be about, basically lines of exclusion. Judaism has never been limited to ritual. It's always included ethics and public morality. And if it ever does, retreat from this, it will be a caricature of Jewish life. So can I count on Makom Solel Lakeside that you're not going to retreat? You're going to stand strong, even if people give you the pushback. That doesn't mean that we lessen that. That's critical. I know I've got a couple more minutes. If you need to go get ready for your Super Bowl party, right. If there are any other questions, I want to answer them.
I know Ross has a question, but I also want to say, Rabbi, that could have been a pay-per-view, you and the Orthodox guy, or a fundraiser at least, because I would have given anything to see that. Ross, I know you have a question.
Thanks, Vanessa. Rabbi Jacobs, can you talk a little bit we're here in Highland Park in a large suburban area of one of the largest metro areas. Give us a little bit of a sense of what goes on in places like Davenport, Iowa, Grand Rapids, Michigan, and sort of middle America. And again, where you talk about maybe a little broader diversity of views and maybe challenges unique to them that we don't deal with, sort of being in a higher concentration Jewish area, just to give us something to relate to there.
Yeah, it's a great question. Obviously, Ross asked that question as an insider because he knows that that's a very, very important piece of our puzzle. Some people say, you're coastal and a few big cities. That's the Reform movement. Turns out that the original Reform synagogues that Isaac Mayer Wise organized were all in the Midwest or the South. And, I just was in Kansas City last weekend to install their new senior rabbi, Rabbi Stephanie Kramer. And they were one of the original congregations that Isaac Mayer Wise brought into it. So Davenport, Iowa, Vicksburg, Mississippi. You know the names of these places, and some of us have family or we grew up in those places. What it means to be Jewish, can I just tell you a story about Jacobs Camp, which, by the way, is not named after me. It's long before. It's Henry S. Jacobs. I'm at Henry S. Jacobs Camp a couple of summers ago, and I'm meeting with a group of students, and they're kind of looking around at all of the other campers while we were talking, and I thought it was unusual. And one of the, it was like an 11-year-old said, "Rabbi, I'm not used to being around so many Jewish people." She said, "In my high school, my middle school, I'm one of a handful of Jewish students. My religious school class has a couple of students. I mean, I don't think we have, you have hundreds of religious school students at your current, I don't think that's, even on our radar. What does it mean for that student to show up at school after something happens, like there's a war in Gaza, right? And all of a sudden they show up. So one of the things we see is that our small congregations, we have almost 850 congregations in the URJ right now. We have over 300 that are 150 households or less. Mm-hmm. And they are in places that, Las Cruces, New Mexico. Some of them are in Illinois. They don't have to be in the South they can be actually, in nearly populated, very well populated places. And New York has many upstate congregations that are themselves smaller. Some of them are under-resourced, even Colleyville, Texas. And one of the amazing things that we do as the URJ, if I can just pat all my fellow board leaders and colleagues and friends, is we don't leave anybody behind. We want to bring resources. Colleyville, Texas was able to do the impossible because we invest in their security, their well-being, and all those other areas. Jewish life is not going to be whole if we leave people behind. And it may be 70 households in, Ames, Iowa, or in Iowa City, or in, some part of Wisconsin, or even in Idaho. Every one of our communities matters. And what I'm proud is that we have mega congregations, we have large, we have medium, we have small. And can I say some of our strongest congregations are small? It's not all the big are strong and all the little are struggling. Not a chance. It's not all those on the West Coast or the East Coast are doing beautifully and everybody, not true. It's about leadership, it's about creativity, and it's about partnership. So what you're doing at Makom Solel Lakeside, we're sharing that with congregations. When our congregational strengths team hears about a congregation that's thinking about merging, and they say, "Has that ever happened before successfully?" We say, "Actually, yes. It's happened a number of times really successfully." So again, how do we use the experience in every part of the URJ to help any other part? This is a team sport. This is a network. And, we know in the Torah, it tells a narrative of our ancestors wandering 40 years. One of the things that happened was that the stragglers who were left behind were harmed by attackers. So they actually made an adjustment to not leave any stragglers undefended. So I think, Ross, I hear in your question, we need to make sure we don't leave anyone behind. And I think that takes a lot of courage. It also takes resources and it takes leadership. And thankfully, we were strong on leadership. We could use some more resources to do that work the way we need to, but we're not going to leave any part of our movement behind.
Ross, great last question. And I know you have some closing thank yous.
Thank you, Vanessa. Thank you, Rabbi Jacobs, for joining us today, for teaching us, inspiring us, giving us a view to the things that we're doing well at, still move forward, and things that we can always do better. So you've given us much to think about. We're grateful for you joining us today and making sure we at least exercised our mind in advance of afternoon and evening festivities. And we'll look forward to having you join us in person very soon. And until then, thank you again.
Thank you, Ross. Thank you, everyone. Really fun to be with you. And I look forward to visiting you in person again, because you're a very special community and lots and lots of friends there. So be well. Enjoy tonight's game, whoever wins, and I hope to see you soon.
Thank you
Thank you so much.
Good morning,
Wonderful
everyone.
presentation.
Thank you, Rick.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.